Chapter 5. Don't Cross Dr. Calvin. Just getting closer to the mic. With dictatorial control over the populace, quote, and it's in parentheses a quote, he ruled as few sovereigns have done, end of quote. Calvin imposed his brand of Christianity upon the citizenry with floggings, imprisonments, banishments, and burnings at the stake. Calvin has been called quote, the Protestant Pope, end of quote, and the quote, the Genevese dictator, end of quote. So, quote, the Genevese dictator, end of quote, who, quote, would tolerate in Geneva the opinions of only one person, his own, end of quote. Concerning the adoption in Geneva of a confession of faith that was made mandatory for all citizens, the historian Philip Schaff comments, it was a glaring inconsistency that those who had just shaken off the yoke of popery as an intolerable burden should subject their conscience and intellect to a human creed. In other words, substitute for the old Roman popery a modern Protestant popery. And then end of quote. Or end of parenthesis, end of quotations. Okay. Popery. The doctrines and rituals of the Roman Catholic Church. A hostile term. Popery, usually derogatory. The Roman Catholic Church, especially its doctrines, ceremonies, and system of government. Popery, a derogatory name for Roman Catholicism. And that's it. Okay, we're gonna go back. Okay, let's read the quote again. It was a glaring inconsistency that those who had just shaken off the yoke of popery as an intolerable burden should subject their conscience and intellect to a human creed. In other words, substitute for the old Roman popery a modern Protestant popery. End of quote. Or end of quotations, I should say. Durant says that, quote, Calvin held power as the head of this consistory. Let's read okay. The word is consistory, and this is a definition of it. Consistory, a solemn assembly, council, a church tribunal or governing body such as a solemn meeting of Roman Catholic cardinals convoked and presided over by the Pope, a church session in some Reformed churches, the organization that confers the degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, usually from the 19th to the 32nd inclusive, meeting of such an organization, and that is it. Okay, let's go back. Consistory. 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 Okay. So Durant says that, quote, Calvin held power as the head of this consistory from 1541 till his death in 1564. His voice was the most influential in Geneva. So I'm going to read this quote again. Durant says that, quote, Calvin held power as the head of this consistory from 1541 till his death in 1564. His voice was the most influential in Geneva, end of quote. Vance reminds us that Calvin was involved in every conceivable aspect of city life: safety regulations to protect children, laws against recruiting mercenaries, new inventions, the introduction of cloth manufacturing, and even dentistry. He was consulted not only on all important state affairs, but on the supervision of the markets and assistance for the poor. Period. Most of these were laudable efforts. Let's look at that up. Okay, let's look it up.
Consistory.
Consistory. Consistory. Let's go back to Cambridge. Where is it? Yes. See if I said that word right.
Laudable.
Laudable. Yeah, laudable. Of actions and behavior, deserving praise even if there is little or no success. And that is it. Of actions and behavior, deserving praise even if there is little or no success. Most of these were laudable efforts, but matters of faith were legislated as well. A confession of faith drawn up by Calvin was made mandatory for all citizens. It was a crime for anyone to disagree with this. I'm gonna move the phone. It was a crime for anyone to disagree with this Protestant Pope. Durant comments, all the claims of the popes for the supremacy of the church over the state were renewed by Calvin for his church, brackets, Calvin, end of brackets, was as thorough as any pope in rejecting individualism of belief. This greatest legislator of Protestantism completely repudiated that principle of private judgment with which the new religion had begun. I'm gonna reread this quote here, but I want to find out what this word means. Okay. Repudiate.
Repudiate.
Repudiate. To refuse to accept something or someone as true, good, or reasonable. Repudiate. To refuse to accept or obey something or someone. Reject. Repudiate. To decide that an agreement is no longer effective and that you will not do what it says you must do. Repudiate a contract/agreement. Failure to deliver on time will entitle the buyer to repudiate the contract. To decide that you will not pay back money that you owe. Repudiation, noun. Where the buyer accepts the seller's breach as a repudiation of the contract, the buyer will be entitled to damages. And that is it. Yes. So repudiate. to refuse to accept something or someone as true, good, or reasonable. So let's read this Durant's comments again. Okay. All the claims of the popes for the supremacy of the church over the state were renewed by Calvin for his church. ... Calvin, end of bracket, was as thorough as any pope in rejecting individualism of belief. This greatest legislator of Protestantism completely repudiated that principle of private judgment with which the new religion had begun. ... In Geneva, ... those ... who could not accept it would have to seek other habitats. Persistent absence from Protestant (Calvinist) end of brackets services or continued refusal to take the Eucharist was a punishable offense. Period. Heresy again became brackets under Calvin as under Augustine, end of brackets. ... Treason to the state and was to be punished with death ... In 1 year, on the advice of the consistory, 14 alleged witches were sent to the stake on the charge that they had persuaded Satan to afflict Geneva with plague. Period. So I'm going to read that one again. Heresy again became, in brackets, under Calvin as under Augustine, end of brackets, ... treason to the state and was to be punished with death ... In 1 year, on the advice of the consistory, 14 alleged witches were sent to the stake on the charge that they had persuaded Satan to afflict Geneva with plague. Period. Calvin was again following in the footsteps of Augustine, who had enforced, quote, unity, ... through commotion, participation in the sacraments, ... end of quote. A medical doctor named Jerome Balzac dared to disagree with Calvin's doctrine of predestination. He was arrested for saying that, quote, those who possess an internal decree in God by which he has ordained some to life and the rest to death make of him a tyrant, and in fact an idol, as the pagans made of Jupiter. End of quote. Okay, let's look up that word. See if I said it right. It's like posit. Posit. To suggest something as a basic fact or principle from which a further idea is formed or developed. If we posit that wage rises cause inflation, it follows that we should try to minimize them. And that is it. Posit. So here, let's read that quote again. He was arrested for saying that, quote, those who posit an internal decree in God by which he has ordained. So those who suggest something as a basic fact or principle from which a further idea is formed or developed, an internal decree in God by which he has ordained some to life and the rest to death make of him a tyrant, and in fact an idol, as the pagans made of Jupiter. End of quote. Balzac was arrested and banished from Geneva with the warning that if he ever returned, he would be flogged. Period. And let's see what flogged means. And of course, let me see, maybe it's flog. Okay. Flog. To beat someone very hard with a whip, a long thin piece of rope, leather, etc., or a stick as a punishment. Is there more definitions? To sell, especially quickly or cheaply. Flog, especially in the past, to beat very hard with a stick or a whip as a punishment. As a punishment. Flog, to sell something, especially at a cheap price. To sell something illegally. Oh. Okay. He would be flogged. John Trolet, a city notary, criticized Calvin's view of predestination for, quote, making God the author of sin, end of quote. Let's read that sentence again. John Trolet, a city notary, criticized Calvin's view of predestination for, quote, making God the author of sin, end of quote. Period. In fact, the charge was true. As Calvin's own writings clearly state, the court decreed that, quote, thenceforward no one should dare to speak against this book, brackets, institutes, end of brackets, and its doctrine, end of quote. So much for the freedom of conscience which had been promised would replace the Pope's intolerable oppression. Explanation point. Calvin's power was so great that it was tantamount to treason against the state to oppose him. A citizen named Jacques Gruet was arrested on suspicion of having placed a placard on Calvin's pulpit which read in part, quote, gross hypocrite, ... explanation point. After people have suffered long, they avenge themselves, ... Take care that you are not served like M. Verley, in brackets, who had been killed, end of brackets. ... End of quote. Gruet was tortured twice daily in a manner similar to which Rome rightly condemned by the reformers for doing so. Tortured the victims of her inquisitions who were accused of daring to disagree with her dogmas. The use of torture for extracting, in quotations, confessions were approved by Calvin. After 30 days of severe suffering, Gruet finally confessed, whether truthfully or in desperation to end the torture, no one knows. On July 16, 1547, quote, half dead, he was tied to a stake. His feet were nailed. Half dead, he was tied to a stake. His feet were nailed to it, and his head was cut off. End of quote. Wow, we gotta read that again. This is sad. On July 16, 1547, quote, half dead, he was tied to a stake, his feet were nailed to it, and his head was cut off. End of quote. Okay. Okay. So I have found Jacques Gruet on placard on Calvin's pulpit, which there was a quote here, and I found like the book online for free. So you can see like title page, see all of this. So this is his name is Phil Schaff, as you see up there, Schaff. And I'm gonna go back so I can go to the quote. So this is what he wrote. Now this is what throws me off. I'm gonna read this quote and then going to read the book's quote. Quote, so let's read from the beginning up top. On the 27th of June, 1547, a few days after the wife of Pirine had defiled the consistory, the following libel written in the Savoy Yard Patois was attached to Calvin's pulpit in St. Peter's Church. My bad. Let's go back down. Let me do this instead. Trying to get this pronunciation right.
Consistory.
Consistory. Or I guess every definition is different on their own. This one pronounces it different.
Consistory.
I know. So I pronounced it wrong. Consistory. Consistory. So I've been pronouncing it wrong. Forgive me, whoever's listening. All right, let's go back. Consistory. After the wife of Pirine had defiled the consistory, the following libel, written in the Savoy Yard Patois, was attached to Calvin's pulpit in St. Peter's Church. Quote, gross hypocrite, parentheses, gross banfar, end of quote. Thou and thy companions will gain little by your pains. If you do not save yourselves by flight, nobody shall prevent your overthrow, and you will curse the hour when you left your monkery. Warning has been already given that the devil and his renegade priest were come hither to ruin everything. But after people have suffered long, they avenge themselves. Take care that you are not served like Mons Verli of Fribourg. We will not have so many masters. Mark well what I say. And then the book's quote from the book What Love Is This? This is how they wrote the quote. Gross hypocrite, ... explanation point. But here you don't see explanation point. Okay, let's continue. After people have suffered long, but here you see, but after people have suffered. Here it's after people have suffered long. After people have suffered long, they avenge themselves. Period. Or here it goes ... But then it goes ... Take care that you are not served like, then it says M instead of Mons Verli. Let me see, how do you pronounce that? Now it works.
Mons.
Mons Verli, if that's pronounced correctly. Of Fribourg. We will not have so many masters. Mark well what I say. So, what should I say? I'm grateful for the book and for what it has helped me to see who truly St. Augustine is, who is John Calvin really is. So those are things I'm grateful for. For this quote, I don't know if this is an error. I'm using a website and I could not find anything else online. And also I didn't try as much. So maybe there is a free PDF or maybe there's not. And also I'm not going to go to a library or go somewhere just for this quote. Just to find out how the quote should be written in English exactly. So this one, I don't know if I could say is an error. Maybe it could be a difference in translation. I don't really know. But then again, it ends with ... quotations, number 38. And then you look at their references and it says Schaeffer, page 500 and something. Let me go there right now. I'm not saying anything random here. Yeah, Schaeffer cited 502. So, assuming this is quoting from the book that I have in front of me, then they quoted incorrectly, or maybe they're allowed to quote differently. But I feel like they quoted incorrectly, so I guess this is another error for the book. I don't know what to say right now, but hopefully, if someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, it would be appreciated. If they really incorrectly quoted Philip Schaeffer, the theologian, then I'm not sure why they did that, or was it an honest mistake? So, yeah, I'm finding errors, and well, I mean, I still will continue to have faith in what the author is trying to teach us, what he's trying to show us, and I'm grateful for that. And that's what I'm gonna keep my focus on. And my first time experience errors in writings in a book. So, and then lastly, I want to put up the Jackie's Great Writings, which you see it right here on Wikipedia. But of course, the language. But of course, you see Gro Banfar, right? And then you go back here. It says Gross Banfar. Unless, let me see, Gross Banfar. Let me see if that will show. Yeah, you don't see the S. It just says GRO. And then, sorry. And it's in this language, which I can't speak. Just observing it. I can see Mons Verli right here at the bottom. But anyways, so it's interesting to find errors in a book, but so for that we will leave it for now, because I do want to look up the other people that criticized Calvin's view and what happened to them. I would also like to continue looking into these people and into these quotes. So that's it for today. Thank you and good night.